On a radiant morning, the sun cast golden hues across the bustling international airport, glinting off the sleek fuselages of airplanes that lined the tarmac. Travelers hurried along, dragging suitcases and clutching boarding passes, a cacophony of rolling luggage and fragmented conversations filling the air. Among the sea of hurried faces, she appeared almost unassuming, yet her presence carried a quiet, undeniable dignity. She wore a simple pastel dress that flowed gently to her knees, modest and elegant in design, paired with a small leather handbag that rested lightly at her side. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she moved with a calm confidence that seemed to slow the rush of the surrounding crowd, a striking juxtaposition against the hurried chaos around her. As she approached the check-in counter for the flight, a line of passengers ahead of her murmured softly, their whispers drifting through the air, curious and speculative, though none could pinpoint exactly why her presence drew attention. The airline staff, clad in crisp uniforms, barely glanced at her at first, assuming from her modest attire and understated demeanor that she was perhaps an ordinary traveler without any VIP privileges. But when she presented her ticket, their reactions changed subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, as the lead attendant's brow furrowed in a micro-expression of disbelief. "Ma'am, are you certain this ticket is valid?" he asked cautiously, the words laced with condescension hidden beneath polite tones. Her hands remained steady as she replied calmly, affirming her boarding pass. Yet the skepticism in the attendant's eyes grew more pronounced. He glanced at his computer screen again, muttering under his breath before looking back up with a practiced yet somehow forced smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm afraid we cannot allow you to board this flight," he said, his voice artificially cheerful but undercut by a subtle dismissiveness. Confused passengers nearby stole glances, some whispering amongst themselves while others stared outright, sensing the tension but unable to grasp its root. Her composed expression did not falter. There was no hint of anger, no flash of frustration, only a steady, calm resolve that suggested she would not be easily moved or intimidated. Yet the airline staff remained firm, insisting that her appearance suggested she was not suited for the flight, an assumption rooted in superficial judgments and prejudices. She tried to explain, her words articulate and polite, yet they seemed to dissipate against the barrier of ignorance and assumption erected by the staff. Each syllable she spoke, carefully chosen and precise, failed to penetrate the preconceived notions that had already cemented themselves in the minds of those around her. Passengers who had been observing the scene began to murmur amongst themselves, some shaking their heads in confusion, others exchanging incredulous glances, unable to reconcile the contradiction between the woman's humble appearance and the unrelenting arrogance of the staff. As she stood there unruffled, the sunlight glinting off the polished counters and reflecting brightly off the floor tiles, there was a surreal quality to the scene, as if time itself had slowed for a moment to bear witness to the injustice unfolding. The staff continued their attempts to maintain authority, insisting repeatedly that she step aside, redirecting her to a corner of the terminal, but she did not retreat. Instead, she remained poised, an embodiment of dignity and quiet power, her hands lightly clasped in front of her, shoulders straight, eyes calm yet piercing, as though silently challenging the unfounded assumptions being made about her. Her presence seemed to create a ripple in the air, subtle but tangible, causing a few nearby passengers to pause, take note, and begin to question the actions of the staff. "Why are they treating her like this?" one whispered under his breath, glancing at a friend who only shrugged in confusion. "She looks completely normal to me." The tension heightened as the attendant summoned additional staff members. Their arrival meant to reinforce the decision, yet their expressions betrayed slight uncertainty, a flicker of hesitation that suggested they were aware, on some level, that the situation was unusual, though they dared not acknowledge it outright. All around her, the vibrant airport scene continued, announcements over the intercom, the clatter of rolling suitcases on polished floors, the occasional laugh of children, and the hurried pace of travelers hurrying to their respective gates. Despite this lively backdrop, she stood as a quiet anomaly, a figure of understated elegance confronting unwarranted prejudice. Her pastel dress, modest yet refined, contrasted sharply with the polished uniforms of the staff, a visual representation of the divide between perceived status and actual authority. Even as frustration began to simmer among a few onlookers, she maintained a steady composure, a calmness that seemed almost unnatural in its serenity given the circumstances. Time seemed to stretch, each moment drawn out as the staff argued among themselves over the appropriateness of their actions, their whispers betraying doubt and internal conflict. Her gaze moved across the crowd of passengers who had begun to gather, some offering subtle nods of solidarity, others merely observing with curiosity and disbelief. She did not respond with words. Her presence alone made a statement, a silent assertion of worth and self-possession that contrasted starkly with the uncertainty and discomfort of those around her. Finally, after several tense minutes, the lead attendant stepped back, folding his arms, attempting to reclaim a sense of authority he no longer fully felt. "Ma'am, please understand," he began again, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "We're just trying to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers." She looked at him steadily, her eyes calm yet piercing, and responded softly, "I assure you, I understand perfectly. But I will not be denied boarding without reason." Her words, delivered with poise and clarity, seemed to hang in the air, forcing a brief pause as those around her absorbed the unexpected audacity of her composure. In that moment, the irony of the situation became almost tangible. A woman dressed humbly, judged superficially, yet embodying the very authority and control that the staff failed to recognize. The murmurs among passengers grew louder, a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and subtle admiration for her courage. The sun continued to shine brightly through the terminal windows, illuminating the scene in sharp, clear detail, every reflection off polished surfaces enhancing the contrast between her modest elegance and the polished, bureaucratic rigidity of the staff. As the standoff continued, the young woman's calm, unyielding presence challenged the assumptions made about her, forcing everyone within earshot to reconsider the superficial judgments that had led to this moment. And though the staff persisted in their efforts to remove her, she remained steady, unshaken, a quiet force of dignity standing tall amidst the rush, the noise, and the unjust scrutiny of an entire crowd that had underestimated her entirely. The sun continued to blaze brightly over the airport as the young woman, still calm and composed, was guided toward the airplane by two airline staff, their expressions a mix of authority and lingering uncertainty. Her pastel dress swayed lightly with each step, modest yet elegant, paired perfectly with her small handbag that remained casually perched on her arm, as if to assert that she carried nothing heavy, yet bore an invisible weight of self-possession. As they approached the aircraft, the gleaming fuselage reflected the sunlight in sharp, brilliant lines, and passengers waiting on the boarding bridge glanced curiously at the unfolding scene. Some craned their necks to get a better view, whispering to one another, their faces registering confusion, concern, or mild amusement. She maintained a calm, steady gaze forward, acknowledging none of the whispers. Yet her presence radiated authority without the need for confrontation. Inside the airplane, the cabin was a study in luxury. Plush seats lined with pristine white linens and subtle golden accents on the armrests, windows reflecting the mid-morning sunlight streaming in from the tarmac. The interior smelled faintly of freshly cleaned upholstery and the faint hint of coffee from the galley, a welcoming environment to most, but one she now entered under unjust scrutiny. The flight attendants, who had initially greeted passengers with bright smiles, now looked hesitant, glancing between her and the airline staff escorting her, as though sensing that the situation had become far more complicated than a simple misunderstanding. She moved with measured steps down the aisle, each footfall deliberate, her posture straight and unyielding, her hands lightly resting on her handbag. Passengers who were already seated turned toward the scene, some eyebrows raising in surprise, others whispering to their neighbors about the incongruity of the moment. A woman appearing modest, yet treated as if she were an intruder in a space where comfort and luxury were the standard. A child near the front row stared wide-eyed, clutching a stuffed toy, while a mother tried discreetly to explain in a hushed tone to her child that, "She's just a passenger, dear." The young woman's calm demeanor remained unaffected, and as she reached the midpoint of the cabin, she paused slightly, glancing around in a manner that was both observant and subtly commanding. Her gaze did not challenge anyone aggressively. Instead, it carried a quiet, compelling authority that made even the most confident staff momentarily question their own assumptions. One of the staff members escorting her, a tall man in a perfectly pressed uniform, spoke in a controlled, rehearsed tone. "Ma'am, you need to leave the aircraft immediately." She looked at him steadily, her eyes calm yet unwavering, and said softly, "I am already on the aircraft. Please explain to me again why I am being asked to leave." Her words, simple and polite, hung in the air, causing a momentary pause in the cabin. A murmur ran through the seated passengers. Some exchanged incredulous glances, while others leaned forward in their seats, clearly intrigued by the unfolding drama. The tension was palpable, an invisible current that seemed to ripple through the air of the cabin, mingling with the subtle scent of leather and polished wood that adorned the interior. The airline staff hesitated, their practiced confidence faltering as her composed presence silently challenged their authority. Passengers now watched attentively, some subtly recording on their phones, others simply leaning back in disbelief. She maintained her composure, standing still, hands resting lightly on her handbag, her pastel dress neatly draped, unwrinkled, and elegant, a visual contrast to the flustered demeanor of the staff around her. "Sir," she said quietly, addressing the lead staff member, "I have no intention of leaving unless a valid reason is provided. If this is due to my appearance, I assure you it is irrelevant to my boarding status." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, one whispering to another, their earlier certainty now replaced with confusion and a dawning awareness that the situation was slipping out of their control. A passenger in a nearby seat leaned toward a friend, whispering, "Is she someone important? Why are they acting like this?" Another passenger, older and more observant, tilted his head, studying the young woman's calm expression and the meticulous way she carried herself. There was something about her presence that exuded quiet power, a subtle dominance that did not need words or grand gestures. The sunlight streaming through the airplane windows highlighted her soft features, casting a gentle glow that made her appear almost luminous against the backdrop of polished seats and polished floors. The lead staff member cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. "Ma'am, this is highly irregular. We cannot have disturbances on board. You must comply with our instructions." Her lips curved into a faint, polite smile, her tone measured and composed. "Disturbance? I have done nothing but present my boarding pass. I am simply waiting for my rightful place on this flight. If anything here is causing disturbance, perhaps it is the misunderstanding of the staff that needs correction." A few passengers now leaned forward, whispering amongst themselves, some nodding subtly in agreement, others casting sideways glances that betrayed a growing curiosity about her identity. The cabin atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. Where moments before there had been a simple procedural tension, now a subtle undercurrent of disbelief, questioning, and quiet anticipation had taken root. Her calm composure acted as a magnet, drawing attention without demanding it, and the passengers felt themselves involuntarily engaged in the drama unfolding before them. She did not attempt to assert dominance overtly, yet her presence alone compelled acknowledgement, a reminder that authority is not always defined by appearance, and that elegance and dignity can quietly overpower presumptions and superficial judgments. The staff attempted to maintain the veneer of control, but with each passing moment, the contrast between her unshakable poise and their own flustered expressions grew more pronounced. Even the lead attendant, whose confidence had initially been absolute, now hesitated, his voice faltering slightly. "Ma'am, we need to—" He stopped mid-sentence, realizing that his words were insufficient to justify the actions they were attempting. Passengers watched, captivated, their earlier whispers replaced by silent observation, some secretly marveling at the courage and calm she exuded in the face of blatant prejudice. A few began to glance at their phones, capturing the moment, a surreal instance of quiet defiance juxtaposed against luxury and unwarranted authority. She moved slowly, deliberately, allowing herself to be seen fully by everyone around her, every motion graceful, purposeful, yet unassuming. Her small handbag remained perched lightly on her arm, the modest pastel dress draping elegantly, untouched by the chaos surrounding her. The cabin, once a space of routine comfort and ordinary expectation, now seemed almost theatrical, the ordinary transformed into extraordinary by the unexpected confrontation unfolding. The sunlight continued to pour through the windows, highlighting the contrast between the polished, luxurious environment of the aircraft and the unjust assumptions being made against her, making the scene vivid and almost surreal. The staff's insistence faltered further, their earlier certainty eroded by her calm and quiet defiance. The passengers sensed it. They could see that something remarkable was occurring. A woman judged by appearance, modest in dress yet commanding attention, authority, and respect in a way that could not be ignored. And so she stood serene, graceful, and resolute, every eye in the cabin upon her, a living embodiment of quiet power, dignity, and the irony of an authority unrecognized by those who presumed to judge her merely by what she wore. As the young woman stood on the tarmac just outside the airplane, the warmth of the mid-morning sun highlighting her modest pastel dress, the scene around her seemed suspended in a peculiar tension, a moment caught between disbelief and dawning awareness. She remained calm, composed, hands lightly resting on her small handbag, her posture straight and unshakable, yet her presence radiated a quiet authority that seemed to demand attention without uttering a single word. The airline staff who had escorted her off the plane shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence now replaced with visible uncertainty and whispered consultations among themselves, as though realizing that the situation had escalated far beyond what they could control. Passengers, both those who had witnessed the incident from the airplane and those now milling about the tarmac, began to murmur amongst themselves. Some whispered questions, incredulous at what they had seen. Why would they treat her like this? And who is she that they act so strangely? There was a subtle recognition spreading through the crowd, an unspoken sense that the young woman's demeanor, her calm, measured confidence, and the refined elegance of her modest attire, hinted at a truth far greater than anyone had yet comprehended. She did not respond to the whispers or the stares. Instead, she waited patiently, a soft yet piercing gaze scanning the crowd as though assessing who among them understood the gravity of what had just transpired. The sunlight reflected off the airplane's polished fuselage, catching on the emblem emblazoned along its side. And for some observant passengers, subtle hints began to surface. The pristine maintenance of the aircraft, the attention to detail in every surface, and the unmistakable precision in the operations that seemed incongruous with the idea that this woman could be merely an ordinary passenger. Slowly, realization began to ripple through the gathering crowd. Some passengers tilted their heads, exchanging furtive glances, a dawning comprehension flickering in their expressions. The irony of the situation, that a woman so modestly dressed and seemingly ordinary could command such power and ownership, began to crystallize in the minds of those watching. A few whispered audibly now, unable to contain their growing astonishment. Could she own the airline? The question hung in the air like a spark, igniting a ripple of curiosity and disbelief among the bystanders. Meanwhile, the airline staff, increasingly aware that their actions were being scrutinized, struggled to maintain a facade of authority. Their expressions betrayed subtle panic, the certainty they had exuded only moments ago evaporating under the weight of the young woman's quiet, unwavering poise. She remained unshaken, neither defensive nor combative, merely observing, a calm eye in the storm of social tension she had unintentionally created. Passengers, some of whom had initially assumed she was simply a humble traveler, now leaned closer to one another, exchanging theories and conjecture, some attempting to reconcile the contrast between her modest appearance and the improbability of her influence over such a luxury airline. Children, sensing the adult fascination, watched with wide eyes, captivated by the intensity of the attention she commanded without any overt demonstration of authority. The subtle glow of the sun highlighted the gentle fabric of her pastel dress, the simplicity of its cut emphasizing her natural elegance, and her small handbag rested lightly at her side, a quiet testament to understated style that spoke volumes in its restraint. As the minutes stretched on, her calm demeanor seemed to magnify the absurdity of the staff's earlier actions, amplifying the irony in the minds of all witnesses. The murmurs among passengers grew louder, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and incredulity. Observers began to speculate more boldly, some glancing at the airline logo on the aircraft, connecting the dots with hesitant disbelief. The impeccably maintained plane, the subtle operational precision, and her composed demeanor now painted a picture that contradicted every assumption they had previously held. She stood as a quiet symbol of the power of presence, elegance, and unassuming authority, her modest attire and composed manner serving as a direct challenge to superficial judgments. Nearby staff exchanged uneasy looks, one leaning toward another to whisper, We should verify," but the uncertainty in their voices betrayed the fact that the verification of her identity could dramatically shift the dynamics in the tarmac scene. The crowd, once passive and merely observing, now leaned forward, curiosity sharpening into engagement as they sensed that something remarkable was unfolding. The young woman's calm patience amplified the gravity of the moment, each observer becoming increasingly aware that her quiet authority was far more substantial than appearances suggested. Subtle details, the precise alignment of the airplane doors, the gleaming polish of the fuselage, the meticulous organization of staff, now became pieces of evidence to the observant, clues that revealed an incongruity between her outwardly modest appearance and the scale of influence she must possess. Some passengers began taking out their phones, quietly capturing images or video of the scene, unable to believe the irony before them and wanting proof of the moment when social assumptions collided with reality. The sun continued to pour its golden light over the tarmac, illuminating not just her figure but also the reactions of the crowd, highlighting expressions of shock, realization, and slowly dawning respect. In this light, the young woman's pastel dress appeared even softer, elegant yet unpretentious, and her small handbag seemed almost symbolic of the understated nature of true authority. For a few moments, the airport tarmac became a stage, each bystander a witness to the quiet revelation of power masked by humility, a lesson unfolding in real time about the fallibility of superficial judgment. She remained perfectly still, breathing calmly, hands lightly resting on her handbag, observing the subtle changes in the crowd's perception. Passengers who had initially whispered in judgment or amusement now found themselves questioning their assumptions, noting the serene confidence in her eyes and the understated elegance in her posture. Staff members, increasingly aware that their initial treatment of her had been inappropriate, began to shift nervously, exchanging furtive glances and subtle apologies that went unspoken. The young woman did not demand recognition or acknowledgement. Her calm presence was enough to draw attention, to shift perceptions, and to reveal the disparity between appearance and reality. Slowly, a sense of reverence began to ripple through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable, as if the air itself had changed, acknowledging the quiet power she emanated. Even the children, now more attentive than before, seemed to sense the difference, watching her with wide eyes, perhaps understanding on some intuitive level that she represented a force of dignity and self-possession far beyond the ordinary. Conversations among passengers now contained tones of awe. "She handled it so calmly," one whispered. "And look at her, she doesn't need to yell or demand anything. Everyone just listens." The airline staff, meanwhile, could no longer maintain the illusion of control. Their authority had been undermined not by confrontation or anger, but by the serene, commanding presence of a woman whose modest appearance belied her true power. The sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, illuminating the scene with a clarity that made the irony almost tangible. A woman so modest in appearance, judged superficially and removed unjustly, standing tall and calm, commanding respect simply by existing in that space. Slowly, the whispers of recognition grew, and passengers began piecing together the subtle clues, their minds racing to comprehend how someone dressed so simply could exert control over the very airline that had just attempted to deny her. She did not speak, did not gesture dramatically. Her presence, her composure, and the modest elegance of her pastel dress spoke volumes, and each observer, consciously or unconsciously, absorbed the lesson. Power is not always visible on the surface, and appearances can deceive even the most confident assumptions. The sun shone brilliantly over the airport tarmac, highlighting every detail of the aircraft and casting a warm glow on the young woman's modest pastel dress, which fluttered lightly in the gentle morning breeze. She stood with perfect composure, small handbag resting lightly on her arm, as passengers and staff alike struggled to reconcile what had transpired. Whispers among the crowd grew louder, a mixture of curiosity, shock, and admiration, as the young woman's calm demeanor refused to be diminished by the earlier confrontation. She did not raise her voice, did not argue aggressively, yet every subtle movement, every calm glance, conveyed a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. The airline staff, once confident and seemingly in control, now shifted uneasily, their whispers growing frantic as the gravity of the situation became increasingly clear. It was at this precise moment that the airline's senior operations manager arrived on the tarmac, drawn by the commotion and the unusual cluster of passengers gathering around the young woman. His eyes widened as he took in the scene, the woman, standing so gracefully in her pastel dress, unassuming yet radiating undeniable authority, and the flustered airline staff attempting to maintain a semblance of control. He approached cautiously, unsure of what he would say, when suddenly, a subtle yet decisive change occurred. The young woman's gaze swept over the crowd, calm, measured, and piercing, and with a gentle, composed tone she spoke. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice soft yet carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs around her. The words were simple, unassuming even, yet they held an undeniable command, causing heads to turn, whispers to cease, and the entire gathering to shift their attention to her. She continued, maintaining her composure. "I am the owner of this airline. I am responsible for its operations, its staff, and every passenger who flies with us." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Passengers, staff, and even those who had been observing from a distance froze, disbelief etched on their faces. Eyes widened, mouths opened, and whispers erupted into audible exclamations. She owns the airline? No way, that's impossible. All this, over nothing?" The airline staff who had escorted her off the plane froze in stunned silence, their earlier certainty replaced with a profound sense of humiliation and awe. The irony of the situation was overwhelming. A woman judged solely by her modest appearance, removed from the aircraft unjustly, standing calmly and graciously in the sunlight, now revealing herself as the ultimate authority over the very airline that had attempted to deny her passage. Passengers began to murmur to one another, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding slowly in recognition of the absurdity and injustice they had just witnessed. The young woman's calm presence remained unwavering, her pastel dress flowing lightly in the breeze, her small handbag a subtle symbol of understated elegance. She did not gloat, did not demand apologies, yet the power of her revelation was undeniable. The sun illuminated her face, soft features composed and serene, a stark contrast to the flustered expressions of the staff and the stunned amazement of the onlookers. One by one, staff members approached her, their heads bowed slightly, offering quiet apologies, acknowledging both their error and the lesson in humility that had been so unexpectedly delivered. Passengers looked on, some snapping photos, others simply staring in awe at the scene as the realization of what had occurred settled into their consciousness. It was a lesson in judgment, appearance, and authority, a vivid demonstration that power and influence are not always visible at first glance, and that humility in appearance does not diminish capability or status. The young woman accepted the apologies gracefully, nodding gently to each person, her demeanor calm and reassuring, showing that true authority need not assert itself through anger or confrontation, but rather through composure, confidence, and quiet dignity. As she walked toward the airplane, the staff now cleared a path for her, their earlier arrogance replaced by respect and recognition of her position. Passengers moved aside, some still whispering in astonishment, their expressions a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The sunlight glinted off the fuselage, reflecting the pastel hues of her dress and the brilliance of the moment, highlighting the contrast between her modest attire and the overwhelming luxury of the aircraft behind her. Children pointed in her direction, sensing something extraordinary, while adults exchanged quiet acknowledgments, understanding the profound lesson they had witnessed. The airline staff who had initially removed her now followed her lead, ensuring that every action taken from that moment forward reflected both professionalism and respect. As the young woman's quiet authority guided the situation back to order, the tarmac, once a scene of confusion and superficial judgment, now became a tableau of recognition, realization, and respect, illuminated by the brilliant sunlight that seemed almost symbolic of the clarity brought by the young woman's revelation. Her calm smile, soft eyes, and graceful movements underscored the paradox of the moment. That true authority can exist in modest form, that appearances can deceive, and that humility can coexist with immense power. As she ascended the steps to reboard the aircraft, passengers and staff alike watched in silent awe. The earlier incident now transformed into a moment of revelation, a lesson etched into their memories, and a story they would recount with astonishment for years to come. The pastel dress, simple yet elegant, the small handbag, and her composed demeanor became symbols of the irony and beauty of the moment, demonstrating that dignity and quiet strength can command respect far beyond what superficial judgments can ever anticipate. The sun continued to shine, bathing the tarmac and airplane in warm light, illuminating the young woman's path as she gracefully reclaimed her rightful place, not with confrontation or anger but with serene authority, subtle elegance and undeniable presence, leaving everyone present with a profound understanding of humility, judgment, and the often hidden power behind calm composure. The atmosphere on the tarmac had shifted entirely from tension and disbelief to one of astonished respect and quiet admiration as the young woman, her modest pastel dress flowing gracefully in the gentle breeze and her small handbag resting lightly on her arm, prepared to finally reboard the luxurious aircraft she owned. Every step she took was measured, purposeful, and elegant, as though the sunlight itself had conspired to highlight the serene authority she exuded. The passengers, now fully aware of her identity and the injustice they had witnessed moments earlier, murmured amongst themselves, exchanging astonished glances and whispered comments, some leaning closer to their neighbors to remark in disbelief, She's the owner?" While others simply shook their heads, eyes wide, absorbing the irony of the situation. Airline staff, who had moments ago treated her with unwarranted suspicion and condescension, now moved with visible humility, clearing the path for her ascent with gestures that were equal parts respect and embarrassment. The young woman's calm composure contrasted sharply with the staff's flustered expressions, highlighting the stark lesson in perception versus reality that had just been delivered in a matter of minutes. Her eyes scanned the crowd one last time before she reached the staircase leading into the airplane, soft yet piercing, conveying a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson imparted without the need for words. The sunlight glinted off the polished fuselage, reflecting the pastel tones of her dress and the brilliance of the moment, creating a tableau of elegance, irony, and authority that seemed almost surreal to the onlookers. Passengers on the tarmac and in the boarding area who had witnessed the confrontation now stepped back slightly, giving her space, while children pointed in awe and adults exchanged respectful nods. Cameras discreetly captured the scene. Some bystanders recorded video, eager to immortalize the astonishing moment when humility, modesty, and quiet authority had overturned the presumptions of an entire airline staff. As she placed her foot onto the first step, her posture remained perfect, shoulders straight, chin lifted slightly, exuding confidence and grace in a way that left no doubt about her rightful place aboard the aircraft. The staff who had initially denied her boarding now moved in a coordinated, respectful manner to ensure that her journey would continue without further disruption, an unspoken acknowledgement of their error, and the profound lesson she had imparted merely by standing with composure and quiet dignity. Passengers inside the cabin turned to look as well, some leaning forward in their seats, their expressions a mixture of awe, admiration, and disbelief, realizing that they were witnessing not only the return of a rightful passenger, but also a powerful demonstration of humility and authority intertwined. The sun illuminated the entire scene, casting long shadows and highlighting the contrast between her modest attire and the grandeur of the aircraft, the polished interior, and the flustered staff, creating an almost cinematic moment that seemed suspended in time. She ascended the staircase fully aware of every gaze upon her, her calm expression conveying patience, forgiveness, and authority, a combination that silenced lingering doubts and transformed tension into respect. Upon reaching the aircraft door, she paused briefly, offering a subtle smile to the passengers on the tarmac and inside the plane, a gesture of grace that spoke volumes about the character and integrity she embodied. Airline staff followed her inside, closing the door gently behind her, and immediately shifted into professional efficiency, ensuring the comfort and safety of the passengers while maintaining decorum, befitting the unusual circumstances. Inside, the cabin staff moved quickly to prepare her seat, attending to her needs with utmost respect, while passengers who had witnessed the drama exchanged looks of quiet amazement, some whispering softly to one another. She didn't even need to argue, and yet she commanded respect instantly. Her seat, though luxurious and fitting the standards of the airline, seemed almost secondary to the aura she brought into the space. The pastel dress and small handbag had already conveyed more authority and elegance than any seat or cabin arrangement could. As she settled into her seat, passengers nearby stole glances, some whispering admiration, others shaking their heads in awe at the poise and composure she displayed. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted her features, soft and composed, and the subtle elegance of her attire emphasized a lesson in humility, authority, and grace that words could barely capture. Staff members who had doubted her judgment or capabilities initially now moved efficiently and respectfully, their previous arrogance replaced with a professional acknowledgement of her rightful position. While passengers marveled at the complete reversal of perceptions that had taken place, a sense of calm settled over the cabin as the final preparations for departure were made. Yet the memory of the earlier confrontation lingered in the minds of all present, serving as a vivid, unspoken reminder of the folly of superficial judgments. The young woman, seated serenely, exuded confidence and tranquility, her modest dress flowing gracefully and the small handbag resting lightly at her side, a symbol of understated elegance and quiet power. Even as the engines began to hum and the aircraft prepared to taxi down the runway, the scene retained its significance, a lesson in perception, humility, and authority that had been delivered not with confrontation or force, but through poise, elegance, and a calm, commanding presence that left an indelible impression on everyone who had witnessed it. Passengers glanced at one another, some still processing the reality that the woman they had initially judged was, in fact, the very owner of the airline. Staff moved with renewed professionalism, mindful of every action, aware that the smallest gestures could now be interpreted in light of the extraordinary revelation they had just experienced. The sunlight continued to stream through the cabin windows, illuminating the young woman's calm expression and highlighting the gentle folds of her pastel dress, the small handbag at her side, and the serene authority she had projected effortlessly throughout the ordeal. The engines roared to life, the aircraft began its taxi, and yet the significance of the moment lingered, echoing in the minds of passengers and staff alike. The young woman's journey continued, not as a simple passenger, but as a powerful demonstration of the lessons of judgment, humility, and authority, a vivid reminder that appearances can deceive, yet composure, dignity, and quiet confidence always reveal the truth. As the plane lifted into the bright sky, passengers looked out their windows, reflecting on the extraordinary events they had witnessed. A modestly dressed woman, initially judged and removed, now seated comfortably, her presence commanding respect effortlessly, her pastel dress and small handbag serving as symbols of grace, elegance, and understated authority that left an indelible mark on all who had observed her, ensuring that the story would be retold with awe, admiration, and a lasting lesson on the fallibility of superficial judgments and the undeniable power of composure and dignity.